dog training, and welcome to another episode of Dog Talk. Today we're going to talk about the process of teaching dogs skills. And it's not so much about the technical aspects of that. I want to focus more on the overall process and the components that go into teaching. Because there is generally, or there seems to be generally, a confusion about what it means when a dog learns something, in what order they learn something, what's part of teaching, what comes in what order, and so forth. So there is different stages that go into teaching dogs skills. So we often have people tell me, oh, my dog is smart, this should go quickly. And that is probably true if the dog is smart for one part of that equation. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it applies to every stage of the learning process that actually makes a behavior reliable. So let's break this down a little bit and talk about how learning works, and then a couple of things that are important to understand about watching the process unfold with your own dog. So the stages of learning that any process goes through, so let it be shaking a paw or sit or down or whatever the command is or whatever agility trick or whatever it is you're teaching. It doesn't matter what the skill is, it always applies. So the first step is the acquisition, where the dog learns the thing that we're talking about. The second step is about fluency. So we actually don't just know it, we can actually do it without thinking about it. The next step is discrimination. Discrimination meaning, well, sit means one thing and down means another. So when I say sit, you should do one. When I say down, you should say the other, and you shouldn't confuse those. You need to understand the difference. And then comes generalization. Generalization is about reliability under different circumstances. So we're including other aspects to a behavior now. So sit should mean sit, or down should mean down, where the dog hears it, and shouldn't include other things, just come in front of me now. That would not be an understanding of the word sit, or the dog would have associated sit with coming to me and sitting down. So we want the dog to generalize the behavior under different scenarios. And then at the end, there's maintenance, where we just basically have to maintain what we taught, because if we don't practice it, the skill goes away, just like with us. So those are the steps. So let's look at them in a little bit more detail. So the first thing is the acquisition stage. During the acquisition stage, we teach a dog what it is that we want them to do. And in the beginning, we can produce this behavior in whatever way seems the easiest or the best, or however we want to go about it. You could teach, even if you work with play ultimately, you could teach some things with a piece of food if it's a little easier, or if you have a specific obedience behavior or a specific trick, or with the service dogs, a specific task when you have a foundational aspect to that. If food would be easier versus a toy, or toy is easier versus a food, or something else is easier in the context, or sometimes we have to capture it because we can't produce it. But however we can get to the dog doing the thing that we want him to learn so we can put it on cue is the way to go. So we want to get to the behavior first and teach our dog an understanding. So sit or down or whatever means you put your butt on the ground, you put your body on the ground, you jump over something, you come back to me. The general concept of it. So we want that understood so that we not say it in a non-distractive environment, even in a room or in a non-distractive backyard. My dog understands and he can execute this if nothing else happens in that moment, because it's just early stages. Right? But it's about the general acquisition. And in my experience, that's usually even simple for most people to do with a couple of YouTube videos or maybe reading a book or so. That acquisition part with simple obedience commands is not really a big challenge. You can find tons of videos on YouTube or teach you how to teach a dog to sit, and different ways to touch down and come and leave it, and what all the commands are that we teach dogs in the context of basic obedience. And the acquisition is not where people struggle. So if it was just about acquisition and that's it, dog trainers would have a lot less to do. But it's not about the acquisition. Acquisition is where the intelligence of your dog makes a big difference. If your dog is smart, pick it up quickly and boom, there we go, he understands sit. And the most common thing that and I'm sure other trainers here when we get consultation calls is, yeah, my dog does it fine when there's nothing else going on, but it's not working when there's a squirrel running up the tree. That goes to the generalization part of things. Huh? But let's move on. So acquisition is the learning part of this is the task. Now, fluency is practice of that acquired skill to make it fluent. So the dog doesn't have to think about, well, what was it again? What do I need to do? Oh, that is that. Oh, this is this. So the dog understands and can fluently execute. Here, sit up, that's this one. Oh, that's that one. So there is no thinking anymore required, or not, let's say not no thinking, but let's say minimal thinking. It's not like a big process where we have to think about, well, what was that again? What was the thing again they just asked me? What does that mean again? So we want to get to the point where our dog clearly understands and can beautifully execute whatever it is that we told them. So that's the fluency component. Also, that is usually just more practice and more repetitions. Doesn't take many repetitions to get to fluency, but that's usually what it is. Just practice the skill somewhat. Now, it's discrimination. So discrimination is important. So if I say one thing, my dog does it and doesn't confuse it with another. So when I ask him to come, I don't want him to lie down. That would be the opposite of coming, and vice versa. So we have to make it very clear during the teaching process what these different things are. So we can't be convoluting them and saying one when we mean the other. So clear communication, using the same word, using it in the right order. Communicating it very clearly what that is a sit, and that is a down, and that is a come, and that is a leave it, and that is a wait, and that is a stand, and whatever it is. So the dog clearly understands what different words mean. And that kind of all goes into the whole process of fluency as well, but they're not all distinct. They're just like the different things we have to consider. So don't think of all of them other than in order, sequentially. Not necessarily. Right? So there is some overlap and some combination going on during the process. We just want to think about the different aspects in a very clear way so we understand which part is missing and which part is not. Which part has been accomplished and which part is still lacking. So that's the discrimination. So understand the difference between different things and what those different things mean, and then do them accordingly when we ask for one and don't do the other in that case. So now it gets to generalization. And generalization means that my dog understands this needs to be done under any circumstance, or in certain contexts that we haven't practiced it in either necessarily. So when we say down, that includes you staying there even when I walk away, or I throw a ball, or somebody comes in, or another dog shows up, or whatever. Squirrel runs up the tree, right? It doesn't matter. So we want to generalize our commands to the degree that we need it. And that's going to be varying by person. Some people will have very elaborate generalization requirements, while other people may not. So a generalization aspect that we certainly have with the service dogs, but not always with the pet dogs, is a down and a sit in motion. So being able to walk away, or while we say sit, the dog sits and I can keep walking. I say down, the dog downs, I can keep walking. It would be sit or down in motion. Is a more advanced obedience behavior. And our service dogs all have that. So they can down in motion, they can sit in motion. And that has a lot of applications and use. It's cute and nice with a pet in your home, but how often are you going to do this? Right? So you usually see these things more in sports, so it's part of protection sport routines. In the obedience section, you see things like that. Very common because it's a more advanced obedience behavior. But it's not really something that most people really care about. I mean, it's neat, but are you going to spend the time making it that reliable? If this dog is your pet and is your buddy and you go hiking and you just want to have a nice harmonious life with them, you probably don't care. Right? It's not that important. Maybe you do care. Maybe you are one of those 5-10% of people who do care for their pet, but I don't think it's more than that. I think 90% of pet owners are perfectly happy if their dog just sits and stays there while you tell them, and that's about it. They don't. Maybe they want to be able to walk away after they tell them, and he holds that. But that's pretty much the extent of it. And that would be then, well, stay out of the kitchen basically while I'm cooking meat because you're getting too up with your nose in my frying pan. But that would be an application of of a downstay, and stay there until they release you, kind of thing. But for most scenarios in real life, that generalization for that level, probably not necessary. But generalization for a heel, when there's a squirrel or other dogs or children or bicycles or skateboards or stuff like that, yeah, you want to be able to continue to walk without your dog going bonkers just because there's a squirrel running up the tree. So that would be a generalization aspect that speaks to the reliability of the behavior under a very common distraction in a park. So that's something you may care about. And that's the generalization aspect in our sequence. And once we've done the generalization up to the point of where we care about it, and that's going to be very individual based on who you are and what your goals are, but once you've done all that, when you went through acquisition, fluency, and discrimination and generalization, then you basically have finished the initial training component of a behavior that we're working on. And the last step of that is maintenance. So maintenance is basically practicing this under the scenarios that you care about. And that can just mean to go about your daily lives and use it as you intended to use it. If you never practice anything, the skill is going to get rusty and it's going to go away. If you haven't been on a bike in 5 years and you try riding a bike again, you're going to be a little bit unstable for the first moment. You're probably like 10 minutes in, you're going to be like back on track, maybe half an hour, but everything comes back and you're back in good shape. But you have to get back into it. And that's the same with the obedience command. So if the dog has learned something and you've never practiced it, don't count on it working under an emergency scenario a year later if you've never practiced it ever. So one of the requirements we have with our service dogs, for example, is for people to practice their tasks every single day. And that is no different than you would, for example, see with a police dog who does building searches. So if you have a dog that does building searches and the dog goes on his shift with his handler, his canine handler, and he didn't do a building search that day, he's supposed to do a building search at the end of the shift and then just to make sure he did one. So from what canine handlers have told me, if they didn't do a building search, they have to do one at the end of the day just to make sure the dog stays sharp, stays on point, and always does his building searches correctly. So there's daily practice. Every day of the dog's working life, the dog will practice. And that's the same with our service dogs. And when you have a pet, you should do the same thing with the things you care about and the things you want to work under all kinds of scenarios that matter to you. If you don't, there's a good indication that this command probably wasn't meaningful in the first place, and you probably didn't need it, and it probably doesn't matter anyways. So there's this like general thing of we have to teach this command or that command, there's these packages, and we also have a set of commands we're teaching, and some of which you may not use. And that's perfectly fine. And so everybody's different, everybody has different requirements, and at the end of the day, if you got a nice downstay and a decent recall, that's for me personally, for my own dogs, enough. But everybody has different requirements. So those are the stages: acquisition, fluency, discrimination, generalization, and maintenance. That is how learning overall progresses. And if you think about those, you can see that the intelligence of a dog doesn't necessarily help you on the generalization part. It's going to help you with everything else. But on the generalization part, it may not work in your favor, actually. Because a smart dog who may want to chase squirrels will maybe look for an angle to try to chase the squirrel and do what you asked him to do, or try to work around it and chase the squirrel instead. So you could see that a really intelligent dog may actually struggle more under some generalization aspects of a certain behavior than one that's a little bit dimmer and more like complacent and like, okay, you told me to do this, I'll do that then. Versus a dog is, no, I want to do that. Let me figure out how I can manage that and maybe get around what you just asked me to do because I really want to do something else. Let me look for the angle to make that work. Yeah, so a really smart dog can struggle a little bit during the generalization phase of becoming actually as reliable as you want to. So sometimes it backfires a little bit. Doesn't have to be, but it can. Intelligence has attributes that may work sometimes more in your favor than at other times with a dog. So I hope that made sense. So here's a couple of other things on on teaching and learning that I think are important to understand. So when we acquire a skill, I like to use the example of learning how to play piano, but it doesn't matter. Any skill really works. So let's say you work on a piano piece and you're trying to get over a certain segment, a section of the notes that is a little bit more difficult, and you struggle. You can't quite get over it. You can't get over it. You get frustrated. You can't get over it. And at some point, you just stop, lessons over. It's like, next day you go back to it, you try it again, and boom, all fluid, and you go right through it. Why is that? Well, it is because when you were struggling through it, when you're intensely practicing it and trying to make it work, your brain was working and trying to acquire the skill. There was no external demonstration of that working at this moment, but your brain was clearly trying to make that happen. Because if it didn't, you wouldn't be able to do it the next day without many problems. It would just go. That wouldn't happen if you didn't learn anything during this practice part. So practicing intensely, even if there's no external visual progress, doesn't mean that there is no value in the exercise, and it doesn't mean that nothing was learned. Learning isn't always visible in the initial stages. If you know for sure that you are working in the right way, that you're teaching with clarity, clear communication, the process is right, you're classically conditioning properly or you're operantly conditioning properly, depending on what it is you're doing, as long as you know that the approach you're taking is the correct one, the lesson is clear, and the acquisition will happen, the progress happens even if it's not visible externally. So let me give you an example. And I know there was, this example is actually something that was a little bit frustrating for the owner of the dog because her dog is very smart. And that part was something that seemed a little weird initially until we explained it and then it all made sense. But so here's the thing. So the dog had to pick up an item that was one of the retrieval tasks. And the dog had absolutely no problem getting a ball back when we played with him. Likes to bring balls back. But other items that are not soft balls were problematic. The dog did not want to hold things in its mouth that were firmer. Let's say like a plastic bone or a wooden bone or a metal rod. Or even just a weird item like a rubber glove or a leather glove. Not a rubber glove, a leather glove. Let alone a water bottle. None of that. The dog didn't want any of that in its mouth. It just didn't like it. And it's like I pick up balls and that's it. I don't pick anything else up. So we kept practicing picking up and holding first, and then once that started working, other items. And we started with items. It was a little bit closer to what the dog was comfortable with, but it was something that the dog struggled with for a while. It was a struggle, and it didn't seem like during a week or two even that there was really a lot of progress happening. It seemed really like, in a way, there's not much learning happening, but there was. Then all of a sudden, from one day to the other, boom, the light bulb came on and the dog would just pick up things that he had never picked up before and bring them back, no problem. And soon thereafter, started picking up absolutely everything we asked him to do. 1.5 liter water bottles full of liquid. Whatever it was, he would just pick it up and bring it back. But there was this stretch of learning where it didn't seem progress was happening, but we knew progress was happening. The dog was trying to figure out what it is that we need to be doing regardless of the item. So this generalization part to other things across the board, so it's not just a particular item, like a dumbbell or so, like really generalization of anything. A phone, keys, a lanyard, whatever, a bottle, a Gatorade bottle, whatever it is we're pointing to, you got to pick up. And while it didn't look like learning was taking place, learning was absolutely taking place. And the dog was building the neural circuits in its brain that allowed that to just come together at some point. And as long as you're doing the right things and you know you're following the right methodology, it's clear. It's not confusing. It's a very clear process. It's very obvious what needs to happen. Learning will happen, even if you can't observe it. And that's then on us to not get frustrated. As long as you know you're doing the right things, don't get frustrated when it looks like your dog is not getting it. At the moment, he isn't getting it, but he is still learning. It's still working towards that goal. So just because it doesn't look like it, doesn't mean there isn't anything valuable going on. It would be a big mistake to give up and say, throw in the towel, my dog can't learn this. That would be a mistake. So understand, just because learning isn't always visible during some stages of the process, that doesn't mean it's not happening. You just think about when you had a harder time with a particular thing. Maybe you're great at languages, but it's hard for you to learn math. Right? Or you're great at history, learning history facts, and understanding complex social constructs, but you have a really hard time with statistics or biology or chemistry or something like that. And when you then apply yourself to something that's harder for you, it's going to take a little bit longer and you're going to struggle more. And it may look to the external observer that it's not working out, but it is at some point if you just stay with it. For me personally, I struggled with math until I was in the 9th grade. It was never something I really enjoyed, and I wasn't really good at it. And then math in general, like the light bulb came on, and I became a math wizard. And it was like a graduate of like highest grades in math in high school and college. I was a math guy at that point. It was kind of interesting. Even complex math concepts, I would just like visualize them. Yeah, that's how it goes. So, but I had a hard time with math up to the 8th grade. And then 9th grade in Germany goes up to 13 when you go to college. Well, no problem at all. Just like, went just fine from that point forward. So sometimes it takes a little bit to get into the groove and like build the right neural connections to be able to do this new skill or task or something you're struggling with. This is the same for your dog. Some dog may be super quick on one thing but has a really hard time on another. Some dog may always have the same pattern of struggle for a while and then boom, the light bulb comes on. So everybody has a different learning pattern, a different learning speed. And it's important to not get frustrated. And that's really for us to not get frustrated because we're impatient and we like the things go faster. Right? But as long as you're doing the right things, and you know this is the way to learn, this is a very clear lesson, just understand your dog is learning, even though it may not look like it at every lesson or every day or even a week sometimes, depending on how complex this is, what you're asking. So just keep that in mind when it comes to tool learning. Another thing, so point number 2, would be the law of readiness, which goes back to Edward Thorndike. But the law of readiness means the learner has to be ready to learn. And that goes to, is my dog in the right state that learning can actually take place? So when you have a dog that is fearful in an environment, which is a very common thing in group classes, or just lack of socialization due to locking them up before the shots were complete, which is, by the way, a mistake. You can always socialize before that. Just do it safely, right? Do it reasonably. Don't take crazy risks, but definitely socialize. But anyway, so if a dog just has developed some fears, and now you're trying to go to a group class, and the dog is fearful, that dog isn't ready to learn obedience commands. It's not ready in that moment. When you practice at home, you'll be ready. It'll be probably a beautiful experience because there's no problematic environment for him to deal with. So now he's ready. So you have readiness in one environment, you don't have it in another. If you want to be ready in the other, you have to work on the environment first and the comfort there before you can actually go back to what you want to do, which is obedience, teaching commands. This is the problem with group classes a lot because there's a lot of fearful dogs in there and they don't really benefit a whole lot. The learning really has to happen at home. So group classes are best structured by teaching you, the person in the group class, on how to teach your dog. Maybe have one dog that can do it there and demonstrate it, and then have you go home and work with your own dog at home. It's usually a much better structure for group classes. But that's because the dog isn't ready in the environment. And readiness can mean other things, right? So if your dog has an ailment, or you hiked with him a long time yesterday, maybe he's a little bit sore, practicing something that requires sitting up and lying down a whole lot, it's probably not a smart move the next day. So it's important that you consider your dog's readiness for a particular lesson before you embark on that lesson. And sometimes it may look your dog's ready and you get into it and you see he's really all over the map and he's not himself and or herself, and then you just stop it and say, well, okay, let's go back to it tomorrow. I don't know why my dog's today a little off, but everybody has an off day. I have off days, you have off days, so let's just accept that our dogs also sometimes have off days. So understand if your dog is ready for learning. It's an important thing about not getting frustrated and also making progress, because it can be unproductive to do things if you're doing them in the wrong moment, even though they would otherwise be just fine. Okay, so that is what I wanted to talk about in terms of how to teach dogs and how the process of learning generally goes, and a couple of points to consider as you're going through the teaching process. I hope that was informative, it was helpful, you got something out of it, and I see you again next time. Bye.